top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot. We came from nothing to something, nigga. I don't try nobody, greatest trick.
So we'll just start very quickly, right at the beginning. It's a quick overview. The reason I wrote this out was because I found that a lot of teams that I had joined or coached at kind of not like the lower, not like super low level, but mid-plat, diamond, even low masters joined. They didn't really have a system in place for how they wanted to shot call and how they wanted to coordinate as a team. Now, we all know, and again it says here, that the pros and in Tier 2 and Tier 3, we always talk about communication and how the players communicate and synergize and work well together, and how teams that have a lot of different ethnicities and languages have trouble blending in. Like, people were worried that for a team like the Fusion, which is I have pulled up here, that someone from the UK and someone from Israel and people from Korea and someone from another country, they were going to have trouble communicating. And it's something that's very commonly talked about at the high end of Overwatch, but I don't think there's a lot on the low end in terms of like videos or coaching it. You see a lot of like, how do I aim? How do I build a team comp? How do I position? But communication, I think, tends to go by the wayside, as it's something that just pro teams almost automatically do. But for teams that don't have that same coaching system put in place, it's very difficult to figure out what you should be calling, or what's too much information or too little, and who should be doing what, and this, that, and the other thing. So this was kind of a way to combat that. It's a system that I've used with the teams that I've played on, with teams that I've coached, had it, very, very good amount of success is what I'm going for. Good amount of success with this. And I think the teams that have issues with the communication side of Overwatch can at least glean a little bit of information, whether or not they go exactly by this. And as I said here, it might be non-optimal. It might not work for your team, and but I think the information in it generally is very valuable. Little disclaimer, I am not good at the video game. I'm not the best player in the world, not the best coach in the world, but I think it's a good system, or at least has a lot of net positives to it. So the system itself. Is based around dive, which is why I have this, and it was based around standard dive, which has it written out: the Winston, the Diva, the Tracer, the Genji, the Zen, and Lucio. Lucio and Mercy, depending on what you're running here. But that's when I made this system. Now, it still works in Deathball, but a little disclaimer, I generally, when I talk about this, I discuss things from a perspective of a dive composition, just because it makes it easier for me to describe. So the idea behind the system is that everybody on the team has some sort of role within the communication, and that the information is all segmented. So one person is worrying about one bit of information, one person is worried about the other bit of information, and the idea behind it is that you essentially you're combating cluttered comms, which is a massive issue that I see. Particularly teams that just kind of, start up like, oh, we're starting a team, let's get 6 players together. They have cluttered comms. They're used to calling in comp queue, which is, a little bit different or radically different from scrims. So I wanted to combat that cluttered comms and use the system as kind of a way to slice through all of that and have very particular particular roles for what everybody's calling. So everybody has a role, and it cuts down on that clutter comms, and it allows for more of a streamlined process. Real quick, this is just kind of characterizing what I'm going to say when I describe certain things. Main tank, Rhinoceros, Winston. Off tank divas are, you can read it right here. The main thing is that, like, the main healer, when I discuss it's usually Mercy or Lucio. It can be Ana, and then an off healer, Zen, Moira, can be, again, that depends on what comp you want to run, because some teams like to run Zen and Ana, some teams don't. It depends. All right, so let's start what we're talking about here. The way I have this system is I separate the system into two. Whoa, I have not used this in a while. Oh god, bad too. Two main shot callers. We have a macro caller. Whoa, this is gonna be rough. Macro caller, and then we also have a micro caller. So there's two main shot callers within the team. Now, again, like I said, everybody is going to do something, but the idea behind this is that essentially what is very common is that your DPS, especially in dive, don't make calls. Now, the reasoning for that is that a lot of the times the DPS are focused on a lot of other things like enemy positioning, cooldowns, particularly Tracer shouldn't really be making calls because she has to focus on her cooldowns and her blinks and her recalls and one clipping and very focused on aiming. And when you dedicate any brain power to not doing those things, you're not optimizing your own abilities. Now, obviously, somebody has to make the calls and focus the brain power to it. But in this system, the two main shot callers are players whose characters generally don't require that same level of brain power in terms of tracking stuff, right? Or aiming, things of that nature. So, just as a basics, the macro caller, or we'll start with micro. The micro caller right here is in the role of the main tank. So we see it right here, main tank. Main tank is going to be the role, and in this situation, right, in this dive, it's going to be a Winston. So we're going to take this again from a dive perspective. Micro caller. Let's describe what it actually is. Micro caller is, to put it simply, just the target caller of the team. Now, what it is that the job of the micro caller is to, one, call the targets. It says it right here, call the targets. So what it is you are essentially going to call the targets. During a team fight, while the team fight is going on, you are calling who the team should be focus firing. So who the Genji should be focusing on, who the D.Va should be diving to, who the Zen should be discording, which we'll get to a little bit later. But that's essentially what it is. You also call, in a dive composition like this, you call the jump-ins. You say, all right, we're going to go on the Zen in 3, 2, 1. Your job is to call the targets and who the team should be focusing on. Like I said, where the team moves, and that's the same thing right there. So you're calling, all right, we're going to go on the Zen. He's on the top right. Let's go to the left and jump him in 3, 2, 1. That's kind of your whole job, is to call the targets that your team should be focusing during the fight. In addition to that, you also have to help the supports, as the supports will call, there's a Genji on me, and you want to make sure that you are loudly vocalizing that somebody go help the support. So you're calling targets. You say, all right, everybody focus Moira, 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 and then your Zen goes, there's a Genji on me, and then they go, all right, somebody go focus Genji in the back, peel for Zen, all right, keep shooting the Moira, but somebody go for, stuff like that. So it's the main tank. Now let's kind of discuss why it's the main tank real quick. The reason for it is that the main tank, oh right, I had that main tank. When I made it, it was dive. Now dive, often, now not always, but often the way that dive worked, particularly in a standard dive. Now again, this was something that I'll kind of talk about this after I'm done with this, but there's different ways to dive. But in the standard dive, a lot of it was your Winston jumping on a target or your Winston responding to a low health call. If like the Tracer said, ooh, that Zen's super low in the back, Winston then says jump. But Winston jumps on it. He's the one initiating and moving as the team. He's that front line. He's the tank front line. He moves in, which means he has a good view of the whole battlefield for who the team should be focusing down. Now, it cannot be the reason it cannot be the DPS, right? The reason is that Winston is seeing that whole battlefield. The DPS are most likely not. Specifically, Tracer is probably going to be around corners, looking for, out of position or low health targets, and the Genji is just kind of moving along with the Winston. But the Winston jumping in kind of sees the whole battlefield, and he should be in the thick of it. He shouldn't be, staying away, so he should be able to easily see who the next target is, whether they're low or they're close by, such and such like that. So that's kind of why it was the main tank or the Winston when it was created. Now, again, it works just as well with Reinhardt. Reinhardt should be swinging or moving forward, and he should be able to, while he may not be directly doing damage and just holding up a shield, he has a good view of what's in front of him in the battlefield, and he should be able to call who that focus target should be, even if the focus target is just a Rein shield. Now, another way to dive, and this was brought up to me, is that there is, if you're using like a Widow or a Pharah, you generally have the Widow or the Pharah, when they get a shot, you want to call that the enemy is low, because they're not going to be in the thick of it diving on a target, and they can tank off angles. They are going to say, that Zen got body shot, he's at 80 health, we need to focus him down. What this system does is it still does that same thing, right? And we'll go into it further down about what the DPS should be doing, but what is essentially happening is you have this guy right in the middle as your macro caller while the fight is breaking out, right? That's your Winston. And so imagine that M is flipped upside down. Micro, and Winston. And just a side note, the reason it's called micro, small calls, it's not the big picture of how your team is moving. It's the small, quick fire targets, what you're going on, what you're going for, etc., etc., etc. So what essentially is happening with this, right, is you want your main tank to be the reiterator and the lead caller. So everyone is allowed to call information, which was again, another criticism was that you said, well, people have said that, well, if it's just the main tank calling, he can't have all the info. What happens if the DPS calls? I'm not saying that it's not allowed for any of the other, 5 people in your team, or actually, let's make them little bubbles. Let's make them little dots. Boop, boop. It's not not allowed within the system for any of these 5 down here to make calls. But what's happening, the way the system runs, is that everybody listens to the main tank, right? He's whose orders you're following. So regardless of what info you get from other people, he's what you're doing during the heat of the battle. Now, if before the battle starts, say this is your Widowmaker, she goes and she feeds information and says, that Zen is low. She says Zen is low. It's up to the main tank to make that call. He's your shot caller, to say he basically redistributes that or reiterates on that information to the other 4 and back to the Widow, really. So he gets info and says, okay, that Zen is low, let's jump low. The Widow says Zen is low on top right. He then reiterates, all right, jump Zen low top right in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you're still giving information, right? But you're not making the call. And the same thing if it was a Pharah, right? Pharah says, hey, I got the soldier low. He goes, all right, we're diving soldier. Or he supposedly says, no, we can't. We're not in a position to dive. That'll put us in a weak position. Because what this does is this allows everybody to be on the same page, because they're all feeding information and taking information from one source. They all are on the same page, right? You don't have a Pharah that says, ooh, that Zen's low, I'm going after the Zen, and then, the Genji goes, oh, Zen's great, but the Winstons decided to jump on someone else, and they're all kind of following their own thing, and it gets all fucking scrambled. What it essentially is almost like a feedback loop. You're feeding information, and you're getting information back out. You feed the information, main tank decides what to do with said information, and then he feeds that information right back in way of a confirmation call. And again, this is very quick fire. You have, Widow says, say you're on like fucking, here, actually, real quick. Oops, didn't mean to do that, but that's fine. This. Alright. So you have, let's make a makeshift Nimbani. Back at the point, and then this little high ground here, and this is the high ground up here, the kind of fucking high ground up here. Okay, so this is a little makeshift Nimbani. This is where the point is on Nimbani. So if we're all moving in from mid here, right? the Widow has come around, and she's on this, this kind of low ground down here, and she hits a shot right there, and she hits the Zen low, right? And the Zen gets low, and he's low, and he's starting to retreat back. Imagine you have, well, I guess you wouldn't have Lucy in that situation, but regardless, if you guys are kind of right here, kind of just jockeying for position, right? Or actually, say the shot comes onto the Zen, like, right here. He starts to retreat this way, right? We can say, the Widow says, all right, that Zen's low, I hit that shot. Then the main tank is going to call for the jump in on him. And the way that's going to go in an actual game scenario is Widow goes, hey, hit the Zen, he's really low. Main tank goes, all right, where? Or, she says position, no where. Says Widow, or Zen, top balcony, really, really low. And the main tank goes, all right, jumping on Zen, top in 3, 2, 1, boom. And that was a little bit slower again than I would normally do, but it's like, Widow, oh, Zen's low. All right, let's jump on that Zen low, top in 1, 2, 3, jump, boom, and then you're on it. It's very quick fire, right? And, it gets everybody on the same page, the 3, 2, 1, or the 1, 2, 3, gets everyone diving at the same time. We have a target, we have a position. And that all came from the main tank making that call. The information came from the Widowmaker, but the main tank is the one who made the final call that your team follows. That'll hopefully make sense there. So we'll keep going. We'll keep that up for now. We'll keep going here. Now we're kind of breaking out into why and things. All the questions that people might have. I tried to get as many as I could in. Do I only need to call target names? No. Names... and I learned this from a coach that had coached me to kind of help me with my own personal shot calling when I was, starting with teams, started playing or coaching, etc. And basically the words of advice that I got were a name. If you're only going to call a name, you might as well not call at all. So what you need to be calling is a target and a position. And the position is not position relative to you. So let's just delete this whole thing right here. Let's just underground this, right? So say this is a point, right? And our main tank, our shot, I'm Genji. Our main tank shot caller says, Mercy's low. And I'm on the point right here. I have no idea where Mercy is. So I have to spend time to hunt. Basically, if he says Mercy's low, I go, oh, is she over here? Is she over here? Is she over here? That is wasted time that you could be doing something else. So so say you're on a target, but it's not really low health, right? Right now. You say Mercy's really low. You should be going after that Mercy who's super low. But you don't know where she is, so you can't quickly just swift strike to her. You have to look around and find her. And by that time, she might have already gotten healed, already gotten protection from a tank, all of these other things. So you might just be better off shooting the target you already shot. Now, in the same scenario, if he says, Mercy low, door close to our spawn on point, right? That's right here. I know that that's right there if we spawned over here. Or Mercy entering from her side doorway. That's over here, right? I know these things. Or, okay, whoopsies. All right, say I am still Genji, right? But, there's this Mega that's over here. Let's make a little fucking square here. This is Mega. And I'm kind of roaming around here. And someone says, Mercy low going towards her Mega. I immediately know what that is. I know what that call is. I know where I need to be going. There's no wasted time searching. So when you call, you need to make sure that you not only call which target, but where the target is. And it's very important that those positions are not relative to you. If you're the main tank right here, your main, don't say, Mercy's in front of me. Mercy may be in front of you, but if Genji's off here looking this way, Mercy is not in front of him. He still has to search. What you need to be using is universal markers on the map. Now, again, right here I linked it. So if, again, I'll try to get a link into, actually maybe I'll just quickly link it in chat. of the this actual document here, right? But on the document, there's a website that you can go to that has callouts for all the maps, and your team can review them. Now, you don't have to go that in depth. You can just do stuff basic like back of point, front of point, relative to your spawn, mega under the elevator, stuff, things that people should know, even if they're not perfect, as long as they give a little something, a little bit of extra information that your DPS can use to quickly turn and focus as opposed to wasting time, then you've done your job. So you need to not only call a target, but you need their position, and the position needs to be a universal marker on the map. Like this example, Genji low inside of the gas station. I can say that right now, and everybody knows exactly where that gas station is, exactly what map. And that's what's good about it. Okay, continue. These two will kind of tackle that at the same time. So, why main tank? We discussed that a little bit, right? Main tank, generally the initiator in the front line of the dive. Generally, what the main tank is going to be doing is he's going to be the first one to jump in on a target, or at least very quickly be one of the first to jump in. He's the front line, so it makes sense. So, yep, front line initiator. Now, the important thing is that, now, I'm not saying that it takes less skill, less mechanics, less anything to play Winston, Reinhardt, Orisa, etc. But generally, main tank skills are not based as heavily on aim and mechanics as a DPS. When you talk about DPS, people like Tracer, you talk about blink management, aim, target prioritization, things that require a lot of mental energy. With Reinhardt's and Winston's, the mental energy isn't as heavily geared towards the actual game itself. It's more towards positioning and other things, which by nature help you call these targets, because you know when they're in a bad position, you know what you need to do. So your brain that's focusing on calling the targets doesn't have to focus as heavily on or rather vice versa. A DPS brain that would be focusing more on mechanics, a tank has more room to focus on diving and calling these things and thinking of this. So it basically what's happening is we're making these roles so that we can get the maximum effort from every one of the players on the team. It allows the DPS to focus on, cooldowns and aiming and things like that. It allows the Diva or the Zarya to focus on peeling. It allows the off healer to focus on doing damage and utility and stuff like that. We're trying to maximize the use that everybody on the team can have while minimizing the effort it takes to focus on calls. So that's why main tank. Now, can you do it as off tank? That's a big question I get. Short answer, yes. Long answer, you don't really want to, but you can if your off tank's more vocal. Now that is a wow, I don't know where my brain just went. That is a criticism that this thing has as well, or at least a con, which I had listed out later. Haha, look at me go. It is a con that can be said about this, is that it does require main tanks that are extremely vocal, which, while I think they should be, not everyone is super vocal. So that is a con, is that requires a very specific players. So you can do it as the off tank if they're a better caller, but the reason I don't like that, right, is let's just have I'll make an imagined scenario here, right? So I prefer not to have the off tank. Again, this is a focus in a dive scenario, so assume it's a Diva, right? The same thing works with Zarya, but I think it's easier because dive is a more communication heavy system to see where this can kind of fall apart. So if we look right in this scenario, here we're just made a bullshit fucking point. There's a Zen up here, and that's who we want to dive. All right. Say you have your supports back here, and your Diva is up here, and your Diva's the one making the calls, right? And your Winston's here. So Diva makes the call to jump the Zen. So Diva goes on the Zen because she made that call. If she doesn't go on the Zen, right, if she stays down here, or like kind of in this middle area, you know, able to jump and able to protect the supports, she can't call the next target because the next target is up here and she doesn't know who to call it for. So somebody up there is going to have to call. Or she does dive up here and stays up here, where the Winston dives up there as well with the 2 DPS, but a counter dive is able to come in on the supports and they are unprotected because the D.Va is up roaming around here and she isn't able to quickly turn around because she already used all her cooldowns, quickly turn around and come to protect the supports. Now, if the D.Va is not the one making the call, if this is Winston now, Winston jumps in, D.Va jumps in, and she is able to quickly, if need be, make a decision to either not jump in or to quickly jump in, DM the Winston as he goes in, and then turn right around and be able to protect the supports. Gives more options to the D.Va, because off tanks are essentially the midfielders, especially D.Va, the midfielders of Overwatch. Because if the D.Va's here and the front line is the Winston, and, you know, kind of DPS are kind of following the Winston, Tracer's a winger off on her fucking own, but you have the supports back here, right? Your D.Va needs to be able to quickly move to the front line to do damage, but also come back and shift to a defensive duty rather quickly. And that requires you not to be the one making the calls because you're focused on other things. You're focused on, ooh, who's the next target? Ooh, what do I do, this, that? And your backline can get neglected and counter-dove, which is not good. So generally, I like the main tank to be the caller there. Very important next. Okay. What should I say? How should I call? First off, it should be loud. If you're calling, you need to have your voice splitting through the rest of comms. People can be giving information, but you need to be the loud one, and you need to be the one that is making the difference and being heard and making sure you're the one who will be followed. So there is kind of 3 different situations for how you call, or really essentially there's only 3 things you're going to be calling, or 3 situations. So the first one is the initial dive, which, as you can see here, it's only applicable to dive because it's the initial dive. It's applicable in other ways in terms of, like, it's the initial charge from a Reinhardt, right? But just go with me here with the initial dive thing. Basically what it is you call by, you give a position, bada boom, and a target. So you go, all right, catwalk, or statue, Zen. All right, so I'm diving on Zen, on the statue in 3, 2, 1. So that countdown is also very important. Again, it lets your team be ready. Or if they need to, if you go like 3, 2, and D.Va goes, I don't have thrusters, you can pull the call. You go 3, 2, wait, don't dive yet. You haven't made that call, right? The okay is the go signal here. If you don't hit that okay, you don't go. You know, if you go 3, 2, and then Genji says, I don't have dash, wait a second. You go, okay. You don't say okay because that's bad. You say 3, 2, stop, don't dive. And then you go, you know, Genji says, all right, I have dash. You go Zen, still, statue in 3, 2, 1. Okay, jump. And then you go into the very standard Overwatch. All right, Zen, 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 monkey, 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 more, blah, 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 blah. Quick, fire, fast. Now, when you are making calls, make sure you are always reiterating the target. Don't just say jumping Zen in 3, 2, 1. Okay, get Zen. Say jumping Zen, 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 Zen. Fast-paced, high energy, so it's always on the mind, right? The DPS aren't wondering, did we switch targets? Did that target die? No. You know if you switch targets, you know if that target's dead because they're calling Zen, 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 Zen. That same thing happens just with a standard team fight that's taking place. It's, you know, focus down Genji on the left side of point in 3, or there's no countdown, but it's all right. Focus Genji on left side of point. Genji, Genji, Genji. Oh, he's dead. Focus Mercy. So when you say dead, you're confirming that kill just to make sure your team knows that you haven't randomly switched a target, because you sometimes need to switch a target. If you're getting the Genji, but the Genji's kind of far away, you can go, oh, that Mercy's actually low with no cooldowns. Let's get Mercy, 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 but the Genji's still alive. If we confirm the kill, then we know that that Genji's no longer a threat. The last is just a peel call. You are reiterating on a support's call of peel. If the support says, you know, there's a Genji on me, you go, peel for Zen in the back. And or wherever the Zen is. If he says, I'm by Mega, you know, reiterate that call. Now, again, this is something that I wrote here that you don't always have to do. I think sometimes it's important to tell a specific character to peel, as you know, it can get lost. For instance, if you say peel, you have 3 characters that are trying to peel, but they go, well, someone else will deal with it, which is arguably worse. But it has been pointed out to me, and I can agree that might not always work, because the person you call might be in a very terrible position to go peel for your Zen. So sometimes it's better to just say, go peel for our Zen, and then have that person say, I'm peeling for Zen. Whomever does it, and if nobody goes, I'm peeling for Zen, then you can call out a specific person. That is, again, something that I haven't changed in the actual document, but it is something to think about. Okay. If I die, what happens if I die? Who calls? This one, you definitely call a specific teammate. So you either have a preset order before the game comes in. So before my match, right? Before I have an Overwatch match, I go, all right, whoa, that's a fucking big ass motherfucker. You go, all right, I'm the main tank. I call first, and then go, all right, if I die, then then the off tank calls. All right, if the off tank dies, then the main support calls. If the main support, then it's the off support, and then it's the Genji, and then, well, it's just the fucking Tracer alone. So you basically have a pecking order. Now that goes if, like, all right, you know that, all right, if he's dead, and he's dead, and he's dead, well, who was the third one after that one? Oh, it's that one. So you always know who's calling. Or the other option is to just call out a specific teammate. You know, if I'm the main tank and I die, I can say, all right, you know, you quickly click tab to see who's alive, and then give a name. Say, okay, Diva or Bobby Jean, call. And then when they die, Billy Bob, call. Something like that, right? Call that target. Now, option 1 can be better just because they're prepped for calls. So you have, you know, a good amount of people that are ready to call in case the need arises, but both work. You just want to avoid sloppy calls saying, oh, Genji, please call. And he goes, I don't fucking know how to call. That can be avoided, but both work. Best way to practice, fucking all the time. Literally anytime you're in a game. You don't even have to be in chat. Like, if you're playing quick play, you don't have to be in chat. Just call for yourself to practice. Say, all right, if you play Winston, right, I'm jumping on Zen in 3, 2, 1, and jump on him. Nobody else has to follow you. Nobody else has to even hear you, but you're building the muscle memory. And again, this is something I like to do, and I'm sure everybody's heard it. Put a sticky note by your monitor to remind you to make calls even when you're just practicing. You know, even if you're in a fucking Widow headshot, be like, I'm shooting Widow, bottom left on the stairs, yada, 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 fuck. Stuff like that. Just constantly be building up that muscle memory, the mental muscle memory. So that's main tank and micro caller. Now we'll move on to the second calling position, macro caller. So, who is the macro caller and what is their job? Well, you can probably fucking read, but the macro caller is your main support. Main support being Mercy, Lucio, or sometimes Ana. So MLA format, mothers. Mercy, Lucio, Ana. Reasoning, it's the exact same reason as the main tank being the micro caller. Generally, main healers, except with the exception of Ana, don't require as much aim or concentrating on cooldowns or focusing on things like that. Now, again, there's a lot to focus on as a healer, but a lot of what you are focusing on a healer, we're putting into the macro caller role. And it just requires less raw mechanics than, like, you know, a tracer focusing on blinks and stuff like that. Now, again, that's not disparaging supports in any way, but you can devote far more mental energy than a tracer would ever be allowed to do, and you can be a much better caller than a tracer would ever be. Now, job of the macro caller. You are in charge of ultimates, and tracking ultimates, and planning ultimates for the next fight. So, what that means, tracking ultimates, it is pretty self-explanatory. Your job is to track the ultimates of every single one of the enemy team. Now, that is not easy by any means. It definitely requires a large amount of practice to get good at it. But it is an extremely useful skill. A lot of the very, very high-end supports, especially early in Overwatch and early in competitive Overwatch, were known for their ability to track ultimates, which allows their team to be more prepared for the next fight. So, we'll give an example here, right? Say you're tracking ultimates, and you know that they have no Trents, they have Genji, they have Diva, they have Winston. You could say you're tracking ultimates as Mercy, right? You could say, all right, I know they have Genji ult. So, I don't think since we don't have anything to defend with, we don't have Trance, we're going to let them use it, and I know they don't have their supports, and the next fight we'll use our Blade. So what you're doing is you're tracking their ultimates, so you have a game plan, you can create a game plan, and then you're planning. You're creating a game plan there. You track your ultimate so you know what you're coming up against in the next fight. And this is something that you do in between every single fight, whether it's a win or a loss. You track their ultimates, you can create a very solid game plan, and it gives your team an advantage. Because if you don't have a game plan and you have no idea what's coming, you might pop more ults than you need to. You might not pop enough when the fight is entirely winnable. A lot of mistakes can happen if you're not properly prepared in the fight. So, you are tracking ultimates and planning for the next fight. Let's go more in depth here. Well, first off, the reason is, another reason for the main healer role to be good at this is they know exactly how much damage is being done to the team. They have a very, very, very good look at the battlefield, particularly Mercy and Lucio. They see all of it. They're turning and moving constantly. They're moving around. They see the whole battlefield. They see how much damage is being done, how much damage is being taken. So they have a much better idea of what ultimates are online than, say, a Tracer would. Tracer's not going to be able to track every ultimate besides maybe going, well, it's been 2 minutes. They probably have her shatter. If she hasn't seen the Reinhardt once that game do any damage, which maybe the Tracer never does, they have no idea. But the Mercy or the Lucio is always in the thick of it, always seeing the damage and the healing. They know those numbers. Now, again, it's hard to see exactly, but even if you just have a general idea, if your team has just a general idea, say, I think they have Genji ult, you can plan for that. But if you have no idea, you're in a much worse position. Can I do it as off support? Same thing. You shouldn't. You can, but you shouldn't. Zen is the popular off support pick in this meta. And in the meta that was before, and in a lot of metas. And Zen, personally, I believe is best or can have the biggest impact when they're also doing a lot of damage, not just healing and discording. So I think, if you're just looking at the two supports, Mercy has to devote to tracking ultimates and healing. Zen has to focus on healing, discords, tracking ultimates, and aiming. There's a lot more, I think, for the Zen to focus on than the Mercy. Now, again, totally different roles, totally different players. But I think if you give the role to Mercy and you allow Zen not to think as hard and aim better, the Zen can maximize his output. And again, with all off supports. With Moira, she can focus on doing damage and tracking her cooldowns, which is very important for Moira, rather than focusing on the damage and the healing and the bop. So, I prefer main support. Now, again, if your off support is a better caller, it might work better for your team. This is a template, not a rigorous, whatever the word is. Like, it's not instructions. It's a template that you can use and base off of. But personally, and in my experience, I think the Mercy is better. When do I relay this ultimate info to my team? You will do this info in between fights. Now, again, if a fight's happening and someone's ulting, well, first off, everyone should know, but you should say, even if you're in the middle of the fight, right, it's a long fight, you can say, they've used Grav and they don't have it. You can do that. But generally what I'm talking about here is creating the game plan in between the fights. So what you're doing is in between every single fight that happens, win or lose, you say basically 3 things. And I think I have it written down here. I don't. So we'll talk about the 3 things. You talk what ultimates they used in that last fight. They used Pulse Bomb. Well, a lot of times you don't have to worry about Pulse Bomb. it's safer to assume they have it. It builds so quickly. But say they use Pulse Bomb, they use Trance, they have Genji ult. What should we do? If I'm looking at this, right, I would say, we don't have Trance. Let's just go in a dry push and try to get Genji Blade out, right? Or let's try to get Winston ult out. Stuff like that. But you're basically going, what do we have? Or what did they use? What do they have? What do we have, and how can we use it next fight? Coming in with a game plan allows your team to have a more fluid fight and a much better chance of winning. How do I know for sure if they have ult? You don't, and you never will. You don't have that information. Ooh, bother. You don't have that information. It's really a guessing game at the end of the day. You're guessing how much damage exactly they've done. You know, you can get surprised. You can say, I didn't know they had Reaper ult. I didn't realize he did that much damage. Like, it's not exact, and it never will be exact. Nobody's that good. But the more you practice, the better you will be. So just like the main tank thing, practice in your own quick play games. To yourself, say, okay, they have ultimates. I know the Widow has ultimate. I know the D.Va has ultimate. Track them. Say, they just use this. They just use that. Talk to yourself. Get in the habit of tracking the ultimates, and then by the time you're in a competitive game, it'll be second nature. Why do I need to plan out the ultimates? I think that's kind of a, pretty standard question. Not a standard question, but, obvious question. But for anyone who asked, you just want to make sure the ults are not wasted. That you're not using ults into a lost fight. That you're not using ults, too many ults, or too little ults, or this, that, and the other thing. You want to make sure the fight flows as smooth as can be. And like I said, best way to practice, as it says there. Ebb and flow and shared responsibility. So that was the system. The two-part system. That's the big basics. Now we're moving on to the next. Anybody have any questions?